Hello, I'm so sorry that I can't be with you today. I'm a great admirer of Enseña Perú. I think you have a great mission to pursue. Today I want to talk a bit about where we see Peru internationally and what Peru can do to raise performance in education and improve equity in educational opportunities. And I'm using the PISA 2012 assessment as the benchmark. Here you see the countries that took part, so Peru is not alone. There's a large part of the world economy that is comparing itself regularly against internationally agreed benchmarks. In fact, in 2012, we tested around 500,000 of students. And they took a test, an internationally agreed test. They didn't just look at whether students can reproduce what they have learned. Many students in Peru are quite good at that. The test was about seeing whether students can extrapolate from what they know and use their knowledge creatively in novel situations. And that's very important today because the world economy no longer pays you for what you know. Google knows everything. It pays you for what you can do with what you know, and that often is a very important difference. Our focus was on mathematics, but we also looked at other subjects like reading, science, problem solving, and so on. And then we collected a lot of contextual data from students about their approaches to learning, their social and economic background, to understand what drives student performance, and also data from parents, from principals, and other sources that are important to contextualize learning outcomes. So, what do we know about Peru? Well, the first thing everybody is doing is to look at where countries come out in this international comparisons. This chart is a bit complicated to read. On the vertical axis, you see the rate of improvement. If you're high in the chart, performance is rising. On the horizontal axis, you see the level of performance of education systems, the quality of learning outcomes. If you're on the right side of the chart, the quality of learning outcomes is high. If you're on the left side, there is room for improvement. So when you look at this, you can see countries like Brazil, very high, one of the fastest improving education systems, but also very much to the left, an education system that still has a long way to go. If you look to the right upper corner, you find mostly countries in East Asia, countries doing well, but also still improving. Germany is also an example, performing well and still raising its outcomes. But there are also countries in the lower quadrant where you have neither strong performance nor improvement. Those countries have to really watch out. So where do we find Peru? Peru hasn't been with PISA since 2003, so it's harder to sort of situate Peru. But when we, for example, look at mathematics, we don't see much change since the time that we had data for Peru. But in reading, Peru still lags behind, but has seen actually very important improvement. What this shows is actually that improvement is possible in the context of Peru. Like in Brazil, performance can actually rise. So how does Peru perform overall? You can look at this in two ways. One way is to look at the average score that students obtained in mathematics in a country. That's the blue mark here on the chart. The other way to look at this is how would have students performed if the country would have operated under similar socioeconomic conditions as everybody else. So if countries would have the same wealth, if students would have the same level of parental education, and so on. You can actually see for some countries it does make a very important differences. And that's also true for Peru. The absolute performance of Peru is very low. You can see that in the blue dot. But actually, a large part of that is explained by the social and economic conditions that are still more disadvantaged in Peru than in many other countries. But even if you account for all of this, Peru is still not among the top performing education systems. It still has a long way to go towards raising performance. Part of the issue is to help more students break through social disadvantage. This chart shows you the share of students from the most disadvantaged backgrounds to actually reach very, very strong performance levels. And you can see we can learn a lot from the East Asian countries here. Here you can see the most disadvantaged students, still, many of them still making it to the top performing group of students internationally. Here's the middle group of countries where there is some social mobility, but not so much. And then here you have a group of countries, among them Peru, where for many students, poverty is destiny. That's why the work of Enseña Perú is so important, helping, attracting great talented teachers to the most disadvantaged schools, helping more students from disadvantaged backgrounds to actually reach their true potential. That this is possible, something you can see on the chart, particularly in East Asia. And you can see why this is like this. On this chart, on the vertical axis, you see the performance of each school, and on the horizontal axis, it's social context. And the blue dots are the public schools, the black dots are the private schools, the big dots are the bigger schools, the smaller dots are the smaller schools. And what you can see very clearly is that social economic context is still a very important driver of the school success in the case of Peru. And in part, that is reflected in resources. In fact, Peru is also among the countries where socioeconomically advantaged and disadvantaged schools have often very different educational resources at their disposal, quality of teachers, and many other dimensions of success. However, it's not just a question of poor kids in poor neighborhoods. In fact, the challenges in Peru are there for many kids in many neighborhoods. Here you can see the variability in school performance, shown by the blue part. But on the white part of the bar shows you the variability of performance within schools. What you can see in the case of Peru, even in high-performing schools, there is still a very important fraction of students who do not do so well. There's a lot of variability in learning outcomes in the classrooms, between the classes, in a given school. Every school has room to improve. This is also important. Gender differences. What you can see basically that in Peru, the boys do a lot better than the girls. About half a school year is this difference. If the girls would have higher aspirations, better performance in mathematics, actually Peru would perform a lot better by international standards. We also see that mathematics education isn't equal to mathematics education. You can, for example, see that in the case of Peru, the prevalent form of mathematics instruction is always what we call word problems. Students are given a simple mathematical problem embedded in a complicated text and then asked to solve it. That's sort of something that we don't see very much in the East Asian countries. You find them all on the left part of the chart. When it comes to deep conceptual understanding, that happens a lot less in Peru, where students are taught that mathematics isn't a world of formulas, equations, and algorithms, but it's a language with which students can understand, structure, and model the world. And you can see that that is the most prevalent form of mathematics education in many of the highest performing education systems. When it comes to applying knowledge, that happens quite frequently in the case of Peru. Applying mathematics is an important part. But you know, everything is a matter of balance, actually. When you ask yourself what has an impact on outcomes, you can see if you do very little application, your students do not do so well. If you do a lot of application, your students do not do so well either. It's finding the right balance in the different instructional methodologies. And again, it's an area where Peru can learn a lot by looking at how other countries teach mathematics. So, what can Peru do? How can Peru move up to the top performing education systems in this world? I want to order the kind of policies and practices by their impact on educational outcomes. The important things are on the top, less important things at the bottom. But we also need to take into account the economic and political cost of reform. Some things are very easy to do and very important. These are the quick wins. Some things are not so important and very costly. But don't laugh about it. There are a lot of things that we do day by day in this quarter. Some things are very hard to do but very important. And other things are easy to do but maybe not so important. When you look at this carefully, you can actually see the kind of things that have helped the best performing education systems actually to reach their current performance levels. The very first thing that you can see is a commitment to universal educational standards. High-performing systems have very strong aspirations for every student, irrespective of their social background. And the students themselves believe that success is in their hands. In many of the highest performing systems, students are the owners of success. There are universal educational standards, as opposed to believing that students have different destinations that should be served with different parts of the system. A lot of tracking, streaming, grade repetition, and so on in the system. And there's a very clear understanding of who is responsible for ensuring student success and whom. Let me show you some data on this. On the vertical axis, you can see the performance of countries. On the horizontal axis, you can see this sense of self-efficacy that students see, whether they believe that they can overcome difficulties. You can see on the right top chart, Shanghai in China. When we ask students what they believe makes them successful in mathematics, all of them told us, you know, if I try hard, I trust my teachers are going to help me to succeed, and I will be successful. So the education system has conveyed to every student, privileged and disadvantaged students, that they can succeed, that they can do well. If you look at Peru, many students told us that success is about talent. You know, if I'm not born as a genius in mathematics, I should be studying something else. This tells you a lot about the education system, giving every student the sense that they can be masters of their success, being very ambitious, have high aspirations, but provide also very strong support for this kind of students. You can look at this the other way around. Who do students blame for failure? This is the average. These are the students in Shanghai in China, and these are the students in Peru. So what you can see is that many students in Peru believe, you know, when I'm not successful, this is a matter of the curriculum. The text is too hard. My teachers didn't teach me well. All the kind of things that are outside my control. When you look at the students in Shanghai, it happens much less so. They basically believe that effort and drive is going to change learning outcomes for them. Parents are an important part of the equation too. If your parents expect you to do well in education, want you to complete a university degree, you're much more likely to be motivated to study mathematics, even after accounting for a social background. Similarly, if your parents expect you to do well, you're much more likely to be persistent, pursue your studies consequently. And this doesn't have to do with the wealth of parents, or the academic degree of parents, or the time parents have. Even simple questions from parents to their students. What did you do today at school? How was school today? Have a measurable, very significant impact on the success of students in their schooling. Let me come to a second factor that has to do with the learning environment, the goalposts that are being established, the instructional systems. What we see in high-performing education systems, that those high expectations are mirrored in tough exams, in sort of metrics, in an instructional environment that values success. And the exam is well aligned with what goes on in the classroom. There's a clearly articulated the delivery chain from strong educational standards to strong practices in the classrooms. And again, some data here. Here basically, one way that Peru often responds to educational failure is by letting students repeat a school year. And we can actually see that grade repetition, the prevalence of grade repetition that you can see here on the horizontal axis, is actually negatively related to equity in the education systems. Grade repetition often doesn't help students to advance. It makes it easier for the teacher. Teachers can say, you know, I didn't succeed this year, let somebody else work on the problem next year, but it doesn't help to resolve the problem. And it usually penalizes students from disadvantaged backgrounds. The answer to student failure is early diagnosis and very strong support. That's what we see in the best performing education systems. And there is a very high, actually, cost associated with grade repetition. I don't have data for Peru here, but for the countries for which I can show you data, the costs are phenomenal. Because they don't just include the cost of, 1 year of additional learning. Those students also enter 1 year later into the labor market. They're going to earn 1 year less salary, they pay less taxes, and all of those costs added are far higher than the possible cost of improvement. Grade repetition, not a good response to student failure. Very high on the list of priority, just by very much to the left, comes the capacity at the point of delivery. And again, that's why Enseña Perú is so important. Bringing teachers into the classroom, attracting, developing, retaining effective teachers, providing leadership, management of human resources at the school, maintaining an attractive teaching profession, and continuing to invest in professionalization. Very, very important parts of a successful education system. Some countries have made teaching the most prestigious profession. Despite often not great pay, but it's the professional environment, a very supportive environment where teachers every day work with other teachers. There's a strong sense of professional autonomy, but in a collaborative culture. Something Peru has still some way to go. Let's have a look at the data actually. When we look at the sort of prevalence of lacking teachers, Peru ranks very high. Many schools told us that they are lacking high-quality teachers. It's not extreme Peru. There are some countries where that is more pronounced, but it's a very important factor. And when it comes to educational resources, the quality of educational resources, many school principals in Peru also complain that they're not there to allow them to do the kind of things they want to do. Very, very important challenge. Assessment, accountability, very, very important parts of a high-quality system. Transparency. This is not about how many times you test your students, but it's about using data, using evidence, having a transparent education, making sure that teachers observe what happens in other classrooms, building this kind of collaborative culture that leads to improvement in education systems. I want to just show you a couple of data here. Professional autonomy is an important determinant of success in education. You can see there is a positive relationship between the discretion that schools have at the front line and the quality of learning outcomes. But it's not so easy. When you actually look at this more carefully, if you have an education systems where teachers are not part of the management, when there is no distributed management, where teachers are not sort of shaping the instructional environment in school, you can actually see that schools that are less autonomous perform better than schools that are more autonomous. However, when you have an education system of distributed leadership, you can see the opposite. Actually, strong school autonomy in a system where teachers are part of the instructional environment actually is the best predictor for success in an education system. You can look at this also in another way. When there is no transparency in education system, when data of schools is not public, you can actually see that more autonomous schools tend to perform less well than less autonomous schools. But if you achieve a high degree of transparency in the educational system, a strong sense of accountability, shared responsibility for the system, you see that more autonomous schools come out better than less performing schools. And finally, you see the same thing when you look at the expectations. When you have a shared sense of what good mathematics is sort of systemic view on this, a strong curriculum, a strong instructional system, however, you actually see that basically learning outcomes are better in more autonomous schools. If you lack that shared notion at the system level of what good mathematics is, you risk that more autonomy actually works against you. So how are data being used? You can see actually this is something that is not so common in the case of Peru. There's a lot of room for Peru to grow and using evidence, using data about students, about teachers to actually raise performance. I want to give you an example from Singapore, a country that has actually, it started out where Peru is today about, 25 years ago. Now it's one of the world's leading education systems. Every school implements a global vision of what good mathematics is that is established by teachers collaboratively with the ministry. Every school actually talks with experts on a regular basis of how they can improve performance. Every school provides very good mentorship for new teachers. The views of students are sought very systematically. School is not just about teachers and school principals. Students have a very important role in articulating their views. Every school is evaluated externally. Every school is evaluated internally. Very strong sense of good data. These are the kind of characteristics of highly transparent education systems that actually manage evidence to improve the profession. One of the things that, of course, everybody looks at is, is it better to run school systems or publicly, or do private schools have an important role to play? Well, when you look at this chart, you can actually see that on average, private schools tend to outperform public schools in most countries. But when you look at this more carefully, actually, when you take into account the social and economic context where students come from and schools operate in, actually that advantage disappears. And Peru is a good example. After accounting for the social and economic context of students and schools, actually public and private schools come out more or less the same. So the question for Peru is not how many private schools and how many charter schools it has, but how it enables every school, every public, every private school to take on the level of professional responsibility that we see in the best performing schools around the world. Very important finding. One question, of course, is also how you allocate resources. What we've seen in the best performing systems is that they are very, very good in attracting the most talented teachers to the most challenging classrooms and to get the best and brightest principals to the toughest schools. When you go to Shanghai in China, for example, you find a very deliberate policy for this. If you're a vice principal in a high-performing school in Shanghai and you want to become a principal, the Ministry of Education tells you, yeah, you can become a principal. But first, you need to help us turn around one of the lowest performing schools. So most people who work through improvement, who advance their careers, are actually taking on very tough challenges, demonstrating that they can lead. Very, very important. And again, those countries also spend their money wisely. They tend to prioritize the quality of teachers over the size of classes. A couple of data points on this. Money matters, but only up to a point. Here you can see if you are in a rich country, it doesn't really matter how much you spend on education. There's actually no relationship between spending and outcomes. If you are in a more disadvantaged economic context, like Peru is, you can actually see money matters a lot. Money is very, very important in the context of Peru. But what is equally important is how you actually spend your money. On the vertical axis, you see the performance of countries. On the horizontal axis, you see on the right side countries that spend their money equitably, that try to allocate the resources where they can make most of a difference. And on the left side, countries that are not very good in directing the resources where they can make most of a difference. On the right side, you see a country like Finland. On the left side, you see Peru. Peru has a long way to go to allocate its resources more accurately. And if it succeeds in doing that, it's not only going to raise equity and educational outcomes, but also the overall quality of the education system, as you can see from the positive correlation among the two variables. And the last part of I want to mention is simply coherence. Very difficult to do in political terms. Ensuring that what you do today is coherent with what you're going to do tomorrow. Ensuring that everything in the education system is consistent, that early childhood education aligns with what you do in school and what you will do in higher education. And with fidelity of implementation, ensuring that intended policies translate into implemented policies, and finally, achieve policies. Very tough challenges, but as you have seen at the beginning, in a fair number of countries, we've seen remarkable improvement towards those kinds of goals. And in the case of reading, Peru is among the countries with very steep improvement. In the past, only some students succeeded in education because our economies and societies only needed few well-educated people. Today, we need everyone to be successful. The tolerance, the cost of failure is actually very high. In the past, we could focus on routine cognitive skills. We would teach students something and that would last for their life. Today, where the world is changing so rapidly, it's about learning to learn. It's about ways of thinking, including creativity, problem solving, critical thinking. It's about ways of working, including collaboration, managing relationships, working together. And it's about tools for working, the kind of social, cultural tools to access, manage the world, to basically live and appreciate different values, beliefs. And that has implications for the quality of teaching. You were Enseña Perú. In the past, you could tolerate average teachers because it was all about conveying prefabricated content, government-developed curricula. Today, teachers need to be highly professional knowledge workers. They need to shape the instructional environment. They need to respond to different students. They need to recognize that different students learn differently. Very, very important challenges. And that has implications on the work organization. In the past, the work organization was Tayloristic, industrial. Today, we work in flat, collegial work environments. And that's something I think you are the leaders with. And that, of course, has implications on the kind of accountability systems. There we have. Big shifts, big transitions in front of Peru. But again, Peru has shown that it can address some of those challenges. And you can be a very important part of that solution. Thank you very much.